Hello ladies and gentlemen, this is Rise of the Phoenix, and this is going to be the first video in a new series that I'm going to do. It's going to be a series of tier list videos for Lord of the Rings Rise to War. This video will focus on the evil side tier 1 commanders, while future videos will focus on evil side tier 2, good side tier 1, and then good side tier 2 commanders. I don't think that I have enough experience with tier 3 commanders from either side to produce an accurate tier list for those, and while this list will be my opinion, I still want it to be what I would consider to be reasonably accurate and somewhat like data driven, I guess you could say. Hopefully one day I will have that experience with tier 3 commanders, but not quite yet. Anyways, before we get into it, if you enjoy my content, please consider liking this video and subscribing to my channel. Welcome back everyone. Before we move on to the tier list itself, I do want to take a quick second to clarify that in this particular tier list, it's going to be ranking the tier 1 commanders against other commanders of equivalent tiers, which is why in this tier list, some of the commanders might receive higher rankings than they would if they were being compared to the entire cast of commanders currently in the game. One day, eventually, I hope to release one video that will include every single character, every single commander in one like mega tier list, I guess you could call it. Mega tier list. I don't know if that makes sense, but anyway, yeah. A tier list that has every single commander in the game, good and evil, ranked against each other. But for now, we're going to keep them split up. Let me go ahead and pull this up. That should work. Hopefully I can just move it over here real quick. I do have it a little bit zoomed in, I believe, on the recording software. Hopefully that makes it a little bit easier for you guys to see. So let's start off. We'll put Grishnak in Grishnak tier because he's terrible, even though he's a tier 2 commander. We're just going to put him in the 7th tier for the fun of it. I did not make this, by the way. I think whoever James McNider is, I think this guy made it. So if that is the case, shout out to him, since he went ahead and got all of the pictures together and had all of these rankings already in place. So in a certain sense, I'm piggybacking off of him. So I appreciate it if you watch this video, James. Thank you very much. As for some of the worst tier 1 commanders, we'll start with the worst and go to the best. In Siege tier, we have Yusra. She's not really good for much except for siege, building roads, and gathering resources. Not really going to talk much about her. And this guy, Sharku, he's pretty much the same as her. I haven't really found any sort of, or even seen any sort of amazing reports from him combat-wise, but he does have extra resources gathered, which can help in the early game, and he has extra siege damage, which can also help in the early game when armies aren't doing that much siege damage. Although even in the late game, if you somehow manage to get these to level 50, carrying around a full load of extra troops with each extra siege damage for each troop, ends up being a lot of extra damage. However, by the time late game rolls around, you're not really worried about siege damage anymore, especially as the evil factions with alchemists. So let's go up to what I would call C tier. Go ahead and throw Shagrat in there just because he's not a siege commander, I guess, but he's also not very good. Let's go ahead and put Meltok there as well. Some people I've seen with Meltok running like full wargs as a Respect 5 Meltok. It just doesn't seem that awesome though. At the end of the day, the warg healing skill is like probably the worst healing skill in the game, or one of the worst healing skills in the game. Certainly not that good for the amount that you have to invest into it. And it's just really hard to A, keep just wargs trained, and B, hit the right armies with those wargs, because like you definitely don't want to run into guards at the tower, for example, with your warg riders. You don't even really want to run into halberdiers with them. And Halberdiers aren't particularly wonderful by any means, in my opinion. I think they should definitely buff Halberdiers. So we'll go to B tier with Ugthak. This guy, I feel like he's a little bit underrated, maybe. I have a theory that with the right Urukai build, he would actually be an okay commander. His skills are kind of all over the place, though. Let's go ahead and take a look at him in game. Pull him up here. I think I have him. Yes, I do. So one awkward thing, so he has Warlord, which is pretty nice. I mean, this is going to be a 30% damage boost for Orcs and Urukai. I mean, Alchemists already do tons of damage. Having them do more damage is nice. It's equivalent to the Ringwraith ability for Alchemists, which is a solid ability. But then he has Orcish Warlord, which only affects Orcs. So, like, if you wanted to build Urukai with him, you would take this, but then not take Orcish Warlord, which it just seems a little bit weird. I feel like if this was like Urukai Warlord, that would be really nice. He does have Urukai Captain, which I think is a reasonably decent ability. Urukai Elite, though, it's just not very good. Like, let's say for the sake of argument, you have 300 might, which is a pretty considerable amount of might, but not unreasonable. That's going to add 15%, so 15% of 300 is 45. Let me pull out my calculator so I don't mess up this math. 45 times 0.05% damage increase per point of might. If you have 300 might, this is a 2.25% damage increase to your army for 15 points. Like, it's just not very good. So that's kind of another problem with him, is like point efficiency, in my opinion. It's not that great. Like, Dangerous Trade is quite nice. This is like 5% damage received for 28% increased damage. Like, that's definitely super good. So 28% there, 30% there on your Alchemists, plus they heal themselves. Like, that's certainly not the worst. It's just this, all of these percent-based might speed focus increases, in my opinion, they're just really point inefficient. But that's just me. Maybe some other people have different opinions on those. Let me make sure I'm not getting attacked right now. That'd be super unfortunate, getting attacked in the middle of a video, which has happened. Back to the tier list. All right, B tier out of the way. Now we're kind of getting to the cream of the crop here with these last commanders. I'm going to go ahead and put Agzok actually all the way up at A tier. He might even be worthy of A plus tier, specifically at super high respect levels. I have a hot take / theory that this guy actually outscales Lurtz. So if we go back in game and take a look at Lurtz, he has the Pursuer tree, which is very nice. Agzok has that too. Urukai Firstborn tree, which is super nice. He has Urukai Elite, which we just talked about being not that good, but it's like a tiny amount of extra damage, so sure, he's not respect 5 for mine. Anyways, White Hand is actually quite nice though, and Untiring is, in my opinion, amazing, absolutely fantastic. Damage reduction on your Urukai, gain stun immunity, and this is alright too. Anyways, the point being, after you hit like respect 3, especially with Impart Wisdom in play, you don't really have any points that let Lurtz do extra damage. And Lurtz's job is to do extra damage. You can put a couple points into this and 1 point into that if you want, but like, it's not going to make him do more damage, and that's just what you want him to do. It is going to buff specific units a little bit, but you don't really want to be running Alchemists as Lurtz anyway, and Berserkers are stun immune anyway. So then if we compare that to our good friend Agzok here, this guy has Pursuer, which is super nice. Black Numenorian anti-healing, pretty helpful. Shadow the Mist, more damage. Laceration, more damage. Weapons expertise, more damage. Mountain Warrior, more damage against ranged units, and the good side loves to run Bow Knights and Sentinels, so that's quite nice. Seeker, more damage, again against ranged units. And Heartseeker, more damage, and this will likely target ranged units every single time because it hits enemy targets with the lowest HP, and ranged units tend to have low HP values. So the point being, if you're talking about respect level 20 to 25, I feel like Agzok just has more good points to spend than Lurtz does. So maybe somebody that watches this video has both Agzok and Lurtz at like respect 20 plus and could actually answer the question for sure. Because I just think he might outscale Lurtz, which would be pretty crazy, because Lurtz is a great commander, no doubt about that. Okay, pull this guy back up. Moving on to A plus tier. Let's go with one of my favorite commanders, Gorbag. This guy, you know what? I should close out of this screen in game so that random sounds don't happen in the background while we're doing the tier list. All right. Gorbag, super solid early game commander. He has a rare source of healing for the evil side, and his orc buffs are just ridiculous. If we come back in game, maybe I should have just kept the commander screen up. Come back in game, look at what he does. 15% damage reduction for orc units and 1 HP. Amazing title there. Orcish Warlord, even more damage reduction. So these two right here as a source of minus 29% damage received. Adds some speed, which is somewhat useful. Can be useful in the right circumstances. Generally speaking, when you're fighting good factions, you're up against cavalry, so you're not going to go first anyway, even if you have the extra speed, at least on most of your units. But more importantly, this R5 title is incredible. So 30% damage boost, very high, very respectable damage boost. It gives your orcs a chance to succumb to madness each round, except just kidding, it doesn't, because orcs are immune to madness. This means that Gorbag is one of the few characters in the game that can make his army simultaneously immune to madness and stuns, both of which are super important. He has Enrage. Hey look, it makes them mad, except that it doesn't, because your orcs are immune to madness. Another 30% damage boost there, very, very solid. So these two are a 60% damage boost. This one only applies every third round, though. He has a minor amount of crowd control as well, so this has a chance of inflicting madness on enemies, and this stuns enemies, 100% chance to enemy targets at 7 of 7. So this guy is quite solid. If you have him at like respect 10 plus, you can then put some points into Old Orc and healing, or you can just ramp up his damage a little bit with Laceration and Corrupting Curse. He'll never do a ton of damage, but he can do enough that it can help out from time to time. So definitely a super solid commander. The main drawback of Gorbag is just the fact that you have to have orcs. Like, you just have to have orcs because all of his good stuff only applies to orcs. So he's also super good, by the way, if you need to farm Balrogs and Dragons as evil side. Send him with just Reapers, a full army of Reapers, and he will do great against Balrogs and Dragons with that. And that brings us to S and S plus tier. I don't know if any T1 commander truly qualifies for S plus on evil side in the way that like Eowyn and Wallen might for good side. But we can wrap it up with Grima and Khaldun. We'll go ahead and talk about them simultaneously. I'm not entirely sure which one is better, and I think a lot of it depends on the situation. I've talked in other videos about how I think Khaldun has a very niche, unique position in the current meta, in that he doesn't rely on stuns, doesn't rely on madness, and he uses evil men, which makes him great against Gandalf the Grey. All of his damage mitigation also makes him pretty good against Theoden. He's one of the few commanders I've found that can truly go toe-to-toe with Theoden, and with a little bit of luck on your side with tribal tactics and the right army composition, I actually think he might be able to beat Theoden considering equivalent levels of gear. As far as Grima goes, this guy is just great. I mean, he seriously is. Let's go ahead and take a look at him in game as well. Since I've talked about Khaldun a number of times, I do have a video specifically about Khaldun. So if you want really in-depth information about him, you can check that out. As far as Grima goes, this guy just has a lot of good stuff. His R3 title, Survivor, when you have 15-15, says from rounds 4 and on, so that's 70% of a fight. So you're at round 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. That's 7 out of 10 rounds. So for 70% of the fight, all allied units are taking 30% less damage. Doesn't matter if they're orcs or evil men or ranged or not. That's just everybody taking less damage. Super nice. And then to help you get to those rounds, he has Prudence. So during the first 2 rounds, your entire army has a 50% chance of avoiding damage, but they deal 30% less damage. This is pretty nice because you're effectively taking 50% less damage in exchange for dealing 30% less, which means overall that's a 20% damage disparity in your favor. The reason the first 2 rounds are so important is because that's when things like Convener happen. That's when things like Sharpshooters and Guide, I think it's called Guide from Haldir and Faramir, that's when those things are in effect. So Good Side has a lot of damage that can happen in the first 2 rounds. This helps negate that. One thing I want to point out, I don't believe that Anticipation and Prudence stack because they are 2 different sources of the same avoidance effect, and generally speaking, these effects don't, like, no effect. Poison doesn't stack with poison, stun doesn't stack with stun. No effect stacks with itself. From what I've seen, if somebody knows differently, please do go ahead and point that out in the comments so I can make a correction, which is why I haven't taken Anticipation and Prudence. I feel like Prudence is a bit better since it applies to your entire army, whereas Anticipation only applies to the unit that has the lowest defense. So 2/3 of your army most of the time will still be taking hits during those first 2 rounds. Second in command, pretty decent title, 15% damage boost and some extra focus, extra defense from discipline, and then where he really shines is his Wormtongue tree. So he reduces might by 50, which is reasonable. It's like a 3% damage reduction or something like that. He also reduces their enemy commander focus every 3rd round and makes the enemy commander succumb to madness, which seems like a pretty rare thing in this game. There's items and other things that let enemy units succumb to madness, but it seems pretty rare for an enemy commander to get hit with madness. Even like Mouth of Sauron doesn't have that. But what's super important about this is that it's a 100% chance. It just happens unless they're madness immune. Whereas if you look at like Frodo and Sam or Sauron, who have the, what's that thing called? The one ring, Ring of Terror. They have Ring of Terror, which is like a 70% chance to succumb to madness. This is a 100% chance. Also, Master of Mischief hits the enemy army, 2 targets in the enemy army, and inflicts madness as well as dropping their defense. So these both go off every 3rd round. So every 3rd round, the enemy commander and 2/3 of the enemy army are going to be hit with madness. Bonus points if you have a madness helm on him, because items do not start on cooldown. So this actually goes off on round 1. I really wish I could strengthen it some more to increase my chance here. This goes off on round 1, and you can do the math on the other rounds. This video is already getting quite long. But long story short, there's only 2 rounds where the Bone Mask and Wormtongue / Master of Mischief overlap. Otherwise, this is just extra sources of madness. And even on those 2 rounds where they overlap, since this hits 1 enemy target and Master of Mischief hits 2 enemy targets, there's actually a chance that you could hit the entire enemy army on those rounds with madness. So they're just all killing each other rather than killing your guys, which obviously is good. Finally, he has Enfeeble. This goes up to like 40%. So when the enemy army, enemy unit is mad, they take 40% increased damage. So, I mean, this guy, in my opinion, this guy is just crazy. The only thing keeping him from S+ tier is the fact that the enemy can play around madness. However, that's less often as far as I've seen as people playing around stuns. Most people that I've seen seem to be running anti-stun helmets to help combat Khamul, the Witch King, and Gandalf the Grey, all of whom start off combats with round 1 stuns. So not that many people are running anti-madness stuff, which is perfect for Grima, because the downside of Grima is that he does completely rely on madness. You know, I mean, points in Enfeeble are going to be wasted if the target's not mad, right? Points here and here are going to be wasted if the units are immune to madness. But even outside of that, Survivor, in my opinion, is super great. 70% of the time, you're taking 30% less damage. Also, to help get you there, you know, you only really have a gap in your avoidance in round 3. And conveniently, round 3 is when Wormtongue and Master of Mischief go off, so it's not even really that much of a gap in Grima's defenses. So I just think this guy is fantastic. So he's why, you know, that's why I put him at S tier. He might really be S+. I need to use him some more just to test a few more things, but he might move up here in the future, especially with the right set of gear and everything. By the way, Reapers on this guy are incredible. I would just like to point that out. He helps them survive until the rounds where they start shredding everything, and at that point, it's just GG, man. Grima's great. All right, that was a lot longer than I expected it to be, but there was a good bit to talk about. Time-wise, that's why I didn't really focus on any of these guys down here, because in my opinion, you shouldn't use them for combat anyway. Just use them for building roads and siege and stuff. All right, guys, that's it for this video. I hope you enjoyed it and learned something useful. Let me know what you think about my tier list down in the comments below. Do you think it's accurate, or do you think any of these guys should be higher or lower on the list? I'll see you in the next one. Rise of the Phoenix, over and out.